And let's have a look at distortion here. It's pretty well controlled here in video. There's not much sign of it there at the bottom of the frame. We're at 50mm 1/8000th f1.8, ISO 64 handheld on the 7Artisans. G'day everybody, how you going today? It is so good to see you. Yes, we are here with the 7Artisans 50mm 1.8, but what we have here is a bit of a first. This is their first autofocus lens, to the best of my understanding. Now, the question you might ask yourself is this the nifty 50 that I need for my Z or for my E mount camera? And the answer is yes, it might be, especially if you are on a budget. This lens is only $228, whereas the Nikon equivalent, which is a better lens, it's actually an absolutely outstanding lens, but it is around $600 US. So it's almost 3 times the price. If you're on a budget, will this get you through? Well, let's talk about it. This is the 7Artisans Z50 f1.8 AF lens shooting on the Nikon Z8 firmware 2.0. We're at ISO 64 1/500th f1.8. And going into 100%, this lens is lovely and sharp. And even so, that fisherman is quite a long way away. We get some lovely out of focus areas coming towards us. From my perspective, this is a classic example of what a 50mm lens can do for you, allowing you to isolate a subject here in the foreground. We're 1/13th of a second at f1.8, and then get a beautiful soft rendition in the background, a kind of painterly feel. And there's our first look at what very small pinpoint bokeh balls look like in the background. They're a tiny bit fussy in this instance, but most versions of the bokeh balls I like out of this lens. 1/4 of a second f1.8 ISO 64, probably something like an hour or so after sunset, so there's still a little bit of light in the sky. 1/4 of a second, I'm able to get that reasonably sharp handheld. Let's go to 100%. That is looking great pixel for pixel handheld. This is where the focus, the critical focus was on this set of scales here on the bench. And even as we go towards the side, we can see sharpness. This sign here is in the window. It is out of focus. All of this stuff here is out of focus. The difference we will see between, say, this lens and the Z version is the suppression of flare and aberration, both green and purple fringing. The Nikon Z lens will do that better, but otherwise, this lens is sharp, and I like the bokeh, and it's sharp to the corners. So there's 1.8, we can see a little bit of purple, and then we can see it disappears. Purple disappears. We are at 200% here. That's 100%. There's f4. Look along the edges of the water here, and you can see quite a large difference in purple fringing between f1.8 and f4. For example, if you look over here at this logo, and that's just to do, of course, with depth of field. 3.5, you're probably almost getting rid of all of the fringing, but definitely by 4, the fringing appears to me to be gone. That is all sharp over here on this side of the frame. That is all looking pretty sharp. This is the Grand Prix track. I thought it would be interesting to try and get some still lifes of the track as it returns back to the park that it normally is. A street sign there behind the safety barrier. There was something about this ghostly setting that I quite enjoyed. This is the northernmost end of the Melbourne Grand Prix Formula One track, still not disassembled. I like the colours. A lot of sharpness here, plenty of sharpness here. We are at 1/6 of a second handheld, and that is performing great. What I think I was able to get away with handheld is something between 1/4 of a second and 1/6 of a second. And if I had my elbows leaning on something, 1/2 a second is possible with this lens Z8, Z9, ZF with their bigger IBIS units. A little bit more of the behind the scenes of the Grand Prix. I love this image because it's a little bit derelict. I love the color. I love the texture. I love the perspective. I love all of that mud. It really is quite evocative and quite a juxtaposition between the glitz and glamour of the Grand Prix. This, of course, is with the 50mm 7Artisans on the Z9 firmware version 5.0, 50mm 1.8. And quickly touching on weather sealing, I was caught in a really big storm, hammered with rain. This was on the first session that I shot with this lens. There's been 3 sessions in total. The lens continues to go strong. I can find no mention of weather sealing in the documentation or on 7Artisans' website. My best advice is don't get caught in the rain, but so far this lens is going strong and so far so good. Hang around until the end of this video for more daylight images from the 50mm 1.8 7Artisan. Well, I was here to capture the great light, and this is ridiculous. Let's shoot this at 8K on the Z9, see what it looks like. Straight into the sun, 1/5000th of a second, f1.8, handheld, ISO 64, we're running 8K. There's a bit of a flare there, but it's pretty good. I can see on the waves, the top of the waves, a little bit of purple fringing. All right, well, let's start by talking about the build quality of this lens. It's an all metal construction, which does make it heavier than some all composite constructions, but that comes with its pros and cons. So from my perspective, it's nicely built. Then we have an aperture ring. Now, some people say that Nikon lenses don't have aperture rings, that Z lenses don't have aperture rings. It's kind of right, and it's kind of not right. On most of the Z lenses, there is a ring here, absolutely. And in a way, it's better than an aperture ring because you can actually do what you want with it. You can actually program it to do different things. You can program it to be aperture. In other cases, you've got a separate focus ring. The focus ring can be your aperture ring if you want to program it that way. This does have a dedicated ring. There are no clicks to it. There's no lock to keep it on A. I've shot this lens probably for 6 hours, 8 hours, somewhere in that ballpark. And I've knocked this aperture ring twice out of place. So I think that's okay. It has a lot of resistance, so it's not that easy to knock it. The focus ring, it has even more resistance. I don't use focus rings much. I don't really have a problem with it. It's not a big deal. One thing that I think 7Artisans will want to look at for whatever lens they make next, and that's this switch here. It is extraordinarily light to the touch. This is the manual to autofocus switch. It is the only other switch or button on this lens. There is nothing else. The only other thing we can find is in here, and I won't take it off at the beach because we're at the beach. We do have a metal mount, and we do have a USB-C port for new firmware updates. They are 2 great things. But this switch is super light. Now, in that same 6 or 8 hours that I've been working with this lens, I've probably knocked it something like 20 times accidentally into manual focus. Now I know very quickly what's going on, and I solve it quickly. But one way to address this, because quite frankly, I don't use this switch very often. You could lock this switch down by putting some gaffer tape, sticky tape, electrician's tape, whatever sort of tape you want on it, lock it down, and you can change to manual focus in your menus. That's a workaround. That to me is the only thing to look out for on this lens. It doesn't stop this lens from working. You just suddenly don't have autofocus and you just know you've got to flick that switch. Now, why I included this shot is it's 1/8 of a second, but I've pushed the files pretty hard that you can see up here. But these are actually all stars. I just think that's quite a magical outcome. It's 64 ISO handheld at 1/8 of a second. Looking at the bokeh out of focus areas, I think these look great. I love the shapes here. Yes, obviously they are not round towards the edges. That's to be expected with a lens at this price point. I think this lens really shows a lot of character and I really like it. It's really soft. It's not too busy. Yes, there's a texture in there, and yes, there's a ring around it, and yes, they're not round once you leave the center. I'm okay with all of it. It's very pleasing. Half a second, ISO 64, 2.8. The reason I did the 2.8 was to minimize fringing a little bit, and I think it's largely worked. And if you look up at these really tough areas, there's the slightest amount there, an acceptable amount. Clean and sharp result for half a second, handheld with my elbows on the bridge. And is this my favorite image of the night? It might be. 1/5 of a second, f2, ISO 64. You can see here how I've pushed this file. I've brought up the shadows, down the highlights, because I want to see these lights. I want to see all of these individual beams. Probably bring that down a little bit, and it's still looking great. 100%. And just look at how sharp it is. Through here, through here. It's a lens that performs really well. We are at 2.2. We are at 200% here, and there is a little bit of fringing, but honestly, on an image of this scale, and if you decided you wanted to make this a keeper, let's have a look at the purple fringing tool. Yep, that did actually assist. In Capture One, that has actually pretty much mitigated it completely. We are looking at 400% here. That's a lot. At a realistic viewing distance, 100%, I'm really happy with that result, with that level of quality, that level of sharpness in a $228 lens. Another great capture, not much done to this file. We are looking at 1/4 of a second, 2.8. Fringing is pretty much under control, and if we do this, pretty much gets rid of it all. Not quite, but so close it becomes irrelevant, I think. Again, I love the out of focus areas in this lens. I think they work really well, and it has a real painterly feel about it.
This is all metal. It's an all metal construction. We have a composite lens hood, and at this price point, I think it's really, really good. I think this Z lens is probably better than F lenses of old, especially, for example, I had a 50mm 1.4 where the aberrating, the fringing, both green and purple, absolutely crazy, off the charts. My only other thing that I think you need to keep in mind about this lens is it does have, when wide open, purple and green fringing. Something to keep in mind. You can see it in plenty of the images. But once you stop down, 2.8, 3.5, 4, depending on exactly what you're doing, that purple fringing completely disappears. I don't think it's a big deal, and the upside to all of this is this lens is really sharp, and I love the bokeh. Optically, it looks really good. You can either stop it down a little bit to get rid of your fringing, or you can try and fix that in post. That's up to you. And of course, that doesn't happen in every situation. It only happens in high contrast situations. I like this lens. I like this lens because it gives you very good options and it's really affordable. But if you want a lens that's a good step above this, and I don't quite know how to quantify it, it's probably a little bit sharper, but this is sharp. This is also sharp in the corners, so they're doing that well. The Z lens aberrating is lower, suppressed more than this lens. The 50mm 1.8 Z lens is actually one of the first Z lenses to come out, like the first 3. So that lens is now just shy of 6 years old, but it is still better. Focus is fast on this lens, fast enough for a 50mm. We don't need super fast for 50mm. All right, everybody. Well, more importantly than what I think, what do you think about this lens based on what you've seen in this video with both video and stills? Is this the sort of lens for you, or do you prefer to go for first-party lenses? So please do let me know in the comments below. It's been so good to see you, and if this is your first time here, I would love to see you again. So please do subscribe, please share, and please like. All right, bye for now.